You have spent your entire life being told the 10 Commandments are rules, rules about behavior, rules God gave to Moses to keep people in line. And if you grew up in any kind of church, you probably feel a little guilty every time you think about how many of them you have broken. But here is what nobody told you. Those commandments say nothing about rape, nothing about slavery, nothing about child abuse. The most important moral code in human history, handed down by God Himself, and those things did not make the list. Meanwhile, the same Bible that contains them has detailed instructions for how to own slaves properly. That is not a rule book. Something else is going on. And here is what that something else is. Every nervous system in the human body runs on 10 systems. Not 9, not 11, 10. The same number carved into 2 stone tablets and handed to a man on a mountain 3,000 years ago. That is not a coincidence. That is anatomy. Now here is the second thing nobody told you. Your brain is physically divided into 2 halves. 2 hemispheres connected by a bridge. And the Bible divided those commandments onto 2 tablets. 2 groups. And the traditional split, the one theologians have used for 2,000 years, maps to your brain's 2 hemispheres so precisely that it should stop you cold. And then there is the third thing. Moses smashed the tablets, not because God told him to. He did it himself, in a moment of rage when he came down the mountain and got angry. And neuroscience has a name for exactly what happens to the connection between your brain's 2 hemispheres when rage takes over. They studied it, they published the findings. It matches the story beat for beat. You have been told your whole life that the 10 Commandments are a moral rule book. Rules God handed to Moses to govern human behavior. But what if that is the one reading that makes the least sense? What if these 10 laws are not about what you do? What if they are about how your body works? Exodus chapter 20. The mountain is on fire. Thunder, lightning, a voice. 2 tablets carved with the finger of God. You know this story. You have known it your whole life. But here is what nobody showed you inside it. Think about this for a second. If you were writing a moral code for all of human civilization, what would you put in it? You would probably include something about rape, something about slavery, something about child abuse. Those things would make your top 10, right? They are not in the 10 Commandments, not one of them. Christopher Hitchens pointed this out. You can look it up. The commandments that supposedly govern all human moral life have nothing to say about slavery, and the same Bible that contains them has instructions for how to own slaves properly. That is not a rule book. That is something else entirely. Now, look at the number. Why 10? Every Sunday school teacher will tell you 10 is symbolic of completeness. But completeness of what? Nobody can tell you. They just say it and move on. They have been saying it for centuries and nobody stops and asks, wait, completeness of what exactly? Meanwhile, the National Cancer Institute's official medical training module lists exactly 10 organ systems in the human body. The nervous system, the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, the digestive system, the endocrine system, the immune system, the musculoskeletal system, the integumentary system, which is your skin, the urinary system, and the reproductive system. 10 systems running in parallel every second of every day, keeping you alive without your conscious input. The same number. And nobody teaches that in Sunday school. And then there is the tablet problem. The Bible gives you 2 tablets, 2 groups of commandments. But here's the thing most people do not know. Go look it up right now. The Bible never tells you which commandments were on which tablet, not once. Exodus does not say it. Deuteronomy does not say it. Theologians have been arguing about this division for 2,000 years, and there is no resolution. Because the people arguing think they are dividing a behavioral rule book. They are arguing about the wrong thing. And then there is Moses. Moses comes down the mountain. He has the laws that God carved with his own finger. The the most important laws in human history. He sees the people worshiping a golden calf. He gets angry, and he throws the tablets on the ground and smashes them, not on God's instruction. Moses decided to do that himself, in a moment of personal rage, and then God makes a replacement set. If these were a behavioral rulebook, that scene makes no sense. Why would God include a moment where the lawgiver destroys the laws in a temper tantrum, unless the destroying was not a mistake? Unless the rage and the tablets and the smashing were all pointing at something that happens inside a human body. Something that happens to you when you get that angry. So, if these are not rules, what are they? Your brain is divided. Not metaphorically, literally. Two hemispheres, physically separate, connected by a structure called the corpus callosum. The Cleveland Clinic describes it as a bridge, about 200 million nerve fibers crossing it. Signals travel across it in under 20 milliseconds. Left hemisphere handles language, sequential reasoning, the rules that govern your conscious outer life. Right hemisphere handles spatial awareness, emotional processing, the systems that operate below the surface of your awareness. Your inner life. Now, look at how the commandments divide. The traditional split, the one that goes back to the philosopher Philo 2,000 years ago, divides them 5 and 5. The first 5 deal with your relationship to the divine source, your inner architecture. The second 5 deal with your relationship to other people, your outer behavior, inner life on one tablet, outer life on the other, left tablet, right hemisphere, right tablet, left hemisphere, 2 hemispheres, 2 tablets. And Philo, that philosopher who lived in Alexandria around the time of Jesus, noticed something that no one has talked about since. He noticed that the 5th commandment, the one that says, "Honor your father and mother," sits exactly at the hinge between the 2 tablets. It is the bridge, the commandment that connects the divine half to the human half. And Johns Hopkins medicine describes the corpus callosum as the structure that bridges the 2 hemispheres of the brain. The same position, the same function, 2,000 years apart, and they are describing the same architecture. Now, what about Moses? What about the mountain? Every ancient tradition places the gods on the mountain, not because they liked high altitude, because the mountain is the highest place, the place where heaven meets earth. In the Hindu tradition, the gods live on Mount Meru. In Greek tradition, they live on Olympus. Comparative religion scholars have documented that sacred mountains across every ancient tradition symbolize the highest point of spiritual realization, the place where human consciousness meets the divine. Every tradition, same symbol. And in your body, the highest place is the top of your skull, the cerebral cortex, the neocortex. Johns Hopkins medicine says it is the structure that, more than any other, distinguishes the human brain from every other animal brain on Earth. It is where your highest functions live: reasoning, planning, self-awareness, moral judgment. Moses, ascending the mountain, is energy rising to the highest mind. Moses, descending with the 2 tablets, is that higher knowledge moving down into the body's systems. Bill Donahue has taught this for years. Every tradition describes the same movement. The Sufi mystics call it involution. The Hindu tradition calls it the descent of Shakti. Plotinus, the Greek philosopher, described the divine as emanating downward from the highest point into matter. Same pattern, different names. And the story of Moses is using the mountain to say the same thing. So, the tablets came from the highest part, and they describe the 10 systems that run everything below. But here is what makes this more than a structural parallel. Each specific commandment maps to a specific thing that happens in your body. And when you break one, something measurable happens inside you. Something you can put on an instrument. Take the 6th commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." Churches teach this as a prohibition on murder. Do not kill people. Fine. But Bill Donahue raised the question years ago that nobody has answered satisfactorily since. If it is just about murder, why does it need to be a divine commandment? Every functional human society independently arrived at that prohibition. You do not need God to tell you murder is bad. Your neighbor figured that out without divine intervention. So what if this commandment is describing something that happens when you fire the kill circuit, when you go into rage? The HeartMath Institute, which has published its research in peer-reviewed medical journals, has been measuring what happens to the heart during different emotional states for decades. During anger, the heart's rhythm becomes what their instruments measure as incoherent, erratic, jagged. And that incoherence travels through the vagus nerve and sends signals that inhibit attention, memory, and reasoning. The HeartMath researchers have shown that anger does not just feel bad, it literally disrupts the signals running between your heart and your brain. You do not just kill someone else, you short-circuit yourself. Now take the first commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. No divided loyalty, one source, single-pointed focus. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who spent most of his career at the University of Chicago, dedicated his life to studying peak human performance. What he found is that when the brain operates at its highest level, it enters what he called flow. And the key to flow is this. A region of the brain called the default mode network goes quiet. That is the network that wanders, worries, and divides attention between competing concerns. And when it quiets, the central executive network activates, pure, unified focus, and the body responds with a release of dopamine, endorphins, serotonin, and norepinephrine simultaneously. That is the most powerful neurochemical reward your body can produce. And you get it when you focus on one thing. Divided attention shuts it off. Multiple masters kill the state. The commandment is not about worshiping the right deity. It is describing what happens to your system when it divides its allegiance. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Divided loyalty. Two masters. Two allegiances splitting the focus of the system. The American Psychological Association has published research showing that task switching, dividing your focus between two competing demands, reduces cognitive efficiency by up to 40%. A 2009 study by Stanford researcher Eyal Ophir, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, found that people who habitually divided their attention performed worse on every cognitive test than people who maintained focus. And researchers at the University of Sussex found that heavy multitaskers had measurably less gray matter in the anterior cingulate cortex. That is the region responsible for decision-making and impulse control. The divided mind does not just feel scattered, it structurally changes the brain. Adultery, decoded, is the divided system. The commandment is a physical law about coherence. Now, here is the commandment that no one can argue with. Remember the Sabbath day. Keep it holy. Rest. In 2017, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine went to 3 researchers, Jeffrey Hall, Michael Rosbash, and Michael Young, for discovering the molecular mechanisms of the circadian rhythm, the biological clock that governs rest and activity in the human body. And what they found is that this clock is not just in the brain. It is in every cell. Over 80% of protein-coding genes in primates show daily rhythmic expression tied to this rest activity cycle. Every cell in your body is running on a rest schedule. It is not optional. It is not religious. It is written into your molecular structure. And neuroscientist Maiken Nedergaard at the University of Rochester discovered something even more specific. During sleep and deep rest, a system called the glymphatic system activates. That is the brain's waste-clearing mechanism. And when it activates, the space between brain cells expands by about 60% to flush out the metabolic waste that accumulated during the day, including the proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease. Your brain cleans itself during rest. It cannot do it while you are awake and active. If you do not rest, the waste builds up. The system degrades. The commandment did not invent the Sabbath. It described a biological law that was already operating in every cell of your body before Moses went anywhere near a mountain. Thou shalt not steal. The scarcity loop. In 2013, researchers from Harvard and Princeton published a study in the journal Science. They found that financial scarcity, the experience of not having enough, consumes mental bandwidth equivalent to a 14-point drop in measured IQ. That is greater than the cognitive effect of going 24 hours without sleep. And the mechanism is this: scarcity forces the mind into what the researchers called tunneling, hyperfocus on immediate lack. And while it is tunneling, everything else goes offline: planning, impulse control, long-term thinking. The prefrontal cortex goes quiet. The steal mindset is not just an ethical failure. It is a documented neural state, a loop the brain gets locked in when it operates from lack. The commandment is not a property law. It is a description of what happens to the system that runs on scarcity, and nobody told you that. So, if these commandments describe how the human nervous system actually operates, you would expect other traditions to have found them independently. Without Moses, without Sinai, without any connection to the Bible at all. They did. The Indian philosopher Patanjali wrote the Yoga Sutras approximately 2,000 years ago, drawing on traditions that predate Moses by centuries, and he described 10 foundational principles of human consciousness, divided into two groups of 5, the yamas and the niyamas. The yamas are the 5 restraints: ahimsa, do not harm; satya, be truthful; asteya, do not steal; brahmacharya, do not divide your sexual energy; aparigraha, do not covet what others have. 5 restraints, 5 commandments, word for word, concept for concept, the same code. BKS Iyengar, the most respected yoga teacher of the 20th century, called the yamas and niyamas universal moral commandments, not Hindu rules, universal laws. Patanjali and Moses never met. They found the same code. In 2019, Oxford University researcher Dr. Oliver Scott Curry published a study in the journal Current Biology. He analyzed 60 societies across the world, societies with no contact with each other, no shared religion, no shared language. And he found 7 universal moral principles present in every one of them: non-harm, fairness, property, reciprocity, loyalty, hierarchy, purity, independently discovered, everywhere. Jonathan Haidt at New York University calls them moral foundations and argues they are present in human beings from birth, not taught, built in. And here is the piece that should settle it entirely. Hammurabi's code, the legal code of ancient Babylon, dates to approximately 1750 BCE. That is 3 centuries before the traditional dating of Moses. It contains the same prohibitions: no murder, no theft, no adultery, no false witness, different society, different religion, different millennium, same code. Because this is not a code someone invented. It is a code someone discovered. Newton did not invent gravity. He named what was already there, what every person who dropped something had already experienced. Moses did not invent these 10 laws. He described 10 operational realities that every culture that looked carefully enough eventually found on its own. So if that is true, if these are discovered natural laws, if the Oxford study confirms it, if Patanjali confirmed it, if Hammurabi confirmed it, then what was Moses smashing when he threw those tablets on the ground? What breaks when these laws are violated? And what does that look like inside the brain? Let us go back to the golden calf. What is the golden calf? What is it representing in the story? In Egyptian tradition, the bull is the apis, the embodiment of raw earthly power. In the Mithraic tradition, the bull represents the lower animal nature that must be overcome before higher consciousness can emerge. In Babylonian tradition, the bull god is the force of material instinct, the same symbol across every culture that used it: the animal, the earthly, the instinctive drive divorced from higher awareness. The Israelites did not start worshiping a different god. They defaulted to the animal baseline. They let the lower circuits run without the operating instructions. And Moses comes down and sees it, and he gets angry. Daniel Goleman, the psychologist who spent years studying emotional intelligence, coined the term amygdala hijack for this exact event. The amygdala is a small, almond-shaped structure deep in your brain. It is the alarm system, and under certain conditions, primarily threat and rage, it fires so fast and so hard that it overrides the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that does reasoning, judgment, and impulse control. During a hijack, your higher functions go offline. Goleman's research shows this state lasts for 20 to 60 minutes. Your two hemispheres lose their coordination. The bridge between them gets disrupted. Moses got his amygdala hijacked. The two tablets, the two hemispheres, the connection between them, smashed by his own rage, not by God, not by the golden calf, by the emotional state that the animal baseline produced in him. And Martin Teicher at Harvard has published research showing that chronic stress, sustained violation of these operating principles, reduces the actual physical size of the corpus callosum by up to 17%. That is the bridge between the two hemispheres. It shrinks. It is not a metaphor. You can measure it. The tablets do not just break in a moment of rage. Sustained violation breaks them permanently by measurable millimeters in the actual tissue of your actual brain. So what does it look like when the system runs the way it was designed? What did every tradition say you needed to do to get there? What does the oldest operating instruction in the code actually require? Psalm 46, verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. That is not a suggestion. That is an operating instruction. The default mode network is a system in your brain that activates during rest, not during activity, during stillness. Marcus Raichle at Washington University, who identified this network in 2001, found something that most people still have not processed. Rest is not the absence of brain activity. It is a different kind of brain activity, the kind the active brain suppresses. During rest, this network performs memory consolidation, insight generation, emotional processing, and what neuroscientists call self-referential processing. The work of understanding yourself. It can only do that work when you stop overriding it with input. And the glymphatic system, the brain's waste-clearing mechanism, runs during stillness and sleep. The metabolic debris of every thought, every decision, every moment of anger and scarcity and divided attention that you ran the system through today, it all gets cleared during rest. But only during rest. The Sabbath is not one day a week. Donahue has made this point clearly for years. It is the continuous practice of returning to stillness, the regular activation of the maintenance cycle. The system requires it. The Nobel Prize Committee confirmed it. The commandment described it 3,000 years before either of them said anything about it. So here is what you do tonight. And this is free. And it requires nothing you do not already have. Find a dark room. A genuinely dark room, not a dim one. The pineal gland, the structure in the center of your brain that produces melatonin, begins its production cycle in darkness. It needs the absence of light to function. Lie down, or sit, and do nothing. No phone, no audio, no input of any kind. Let the default mode network do what it does when you stop overriding it. Let the glymphatic system run its cycle. Let the bridge between your two hemispheres carry the traffic it carries when you are not flooding it with crisis. Do this for 10 minutes. You can probably manage 10 minutes. That is the Sabbath. That is what it was always describing. Not a religious ceremony, not a calendar observance, a biological law governing a system that has been running inside you since before you were old enough to be told what to believe about it. Every nervous system in the human body runs on 10 systems, the same number on 2 tablets, the same code Patanjali found in India, the same code Hammurabi found in Babylon, the same code Oxford confirmed across 60 unconnected societies on every continent on Earth. These are not rules someone wrote to control you. These are laws someone discovered about how you work. They were written for your body, not your behavior.